Anyway, welcome to our special community night meeting. And the reason we've called this meeting is to hear from a potential new teacher, Matt Lowe's over here. And
yeah. Hold on.
Yes. So, I'm going to give a slight introduction here, just very quickly. There's an unusual wrinkle on this night, which I'll get to in a moment. But I first met Matt because Mark, before the pandemic sometime, he came to me and he said, you know, I know this guy, and I think he's awake, and I'd like to get you two guys together. So I said, sure, go ahead, set it up. So we had a meeting, and Matt told me his story, and we talked a little bit, and sure enough, he seemed to be awake to me. And well, that's great. That's nice to meet the guy, you know. And then he sort of went off, and he has started getting students of his own. He's written a few books, which we have in the library. You can check out. And we talked again several times. And you know, and then he had some recorded talks of his talks to his students, which I listened to, and I thought, you know, this guy, he's not only is he awake, but he's a really good teacher, and not only is he a good teacher, he's right in sync with the teachings at the center. You know, almost word for word. There were times when some student would ask him a question on these talks, and my mind would start to answer the question. He'd say the exact same thing, you know, word for word almost. So I thought, well, this is an unusual situation, see, because in the past, the people who become teachers in our community have always been members of the community and gone through our programs and on retreats, and they knew how we worked and all that, and familiar with our teachings. And then they woke up, and then, okay, it's obvious that if they want to be a teacher, you know, this would be a good opportunity, a good place to do it. But he's from outside. He'd never been on a retreat. He'd never been to a practitioners group. Knows nothing about it. So about a year ago, we got together again, and I said to him, you know, I think you'd make a good teacher here, and I don't know if you want to be a teacher. And he said, yeah, I'd consider it. And I said, but you know, you'd have to go through a year's program, like I think all of you have done, foundation studies or distance studies, and then go on retreats and qualify to go on other retreats and so forth. And would you be willing to do that? Just be an ordinary student, not a teacher, just, you know, a nobody. And he said, yeah, I'll do that. Easy for him to be a nobody. He's awake, see, so.
That's the best part.
Anyway, that was about a year ago. And here we are a year later, and he did that. And he's been a distance studies student. I've been his mentor. He went on the fall retreat with Todd, kept his mouth shut, didn't try to teach anything. Last chance, you get to be just a nobody, I tell you. Enjoy it. So anyway, I asked him to come and tell his story, and then there'll be time for questions and answers afterwards. And see, I'm recommending him as a teacher to you guys, but as is our custom here, you're the ones who really decide. So at the end of all this, we'll take an informal vote. If you want to be a teacher, we'll make him an official center teacher. If you don't, well, he'll go on his way and he'll develop his own thing, and you know, he's got his own students and all that, so it won't break his heart. So anyway.
It's all good.
It's all good. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
So yeah, I'm just going to focus on the end of the path. But one of my writing teachers would always say, a story is a character in trouble. And the story begins when the trouble begins. And the story ends when the trouble ends. And the ending should mirror the beginning. So I would like to say a little something about when the trouble began. When I was 8 years old, going way back, further than last time. When I was 8 years old, I had, for the first time, this thought: I am going to die. It was a momentous, thunderous kind of thought. And at the time, it didn't make one bit of difference to me if 100 years passed before it happened. One day, I was going to not exist. And I tried to imagine this not existing, and it was a full-on existential crisis. And we can say this is where the trouble began, where the ego crystallized into something that seemed absolutely real and vulnerable. But I can also say that reflecting on it the last week or two, the truth itself and insight into that truth were never far off. Around that same time, I had a flash of clarity, the earliest that I can remember. I was laying outside at recess in the grass, looking up at sunlight filtering down through the leaves of a big tree overhead. And for a moment, I don't know how long, it doesn't really matter, I fell into the bliss of undifferentiated being. And around this same time, I also had a very memorable dream. And in the dream, I was walking to the bus stop to go to school. And I looked down at my hand, and I started rubbing my fingers together. And when I did, the skin of my fingers rubbed right off. And underneath was nothing. My whole body was hollow. And at the time, this was a very disturbing dream to me, probably a part of that same existential crisis. But when I think about it now, this dream is very interesting, even prescient. But despite these early and a number of ongoing insights and experiences, as I grew up, I got completely, totally lost in life, as you know, we all do, more or less. And I've talked about many of the ups and downs and the twists and turns in my previous talks, so there's no need to go into them now. But with regard to story structure, I would like to say that the middle part of a story is often a cycle of trying and failing to deal with the trouble. And this is exactly what it was like. Everything that I tried to do to make myself happy, to find some measure of stability in my life, to find satisfaction, it all sooner or later failed, either by not getting what I wanted or by getting what I wanted. You just couldn't win at that game. But only when my failures were nearing completion, when they had extended through every area of my life and my practice as well, could the final chapters of this journey really begin. And around the age of 40, I was gradually approaching this point of no return. And there was nowhere left to look. And far from dreading the death, I started to understand why some people might long for it. And I was increasingly afflicted by anxiety, depression, and a kind of groundless rage, unlike anything that I had ever known before, and which would rear up over the slightest things like dropping a pen or spilling a glass of orange juice. And during this period of my life, it became more and more clear that my life was an impossible problem. And nowhere was this more clear than in my personal life. And after my divorce, I found it impossible to commit to any kind of relationship. And I did have opportunities and even dated a few people, but I always remained aloof and or was relieved when the whole thing came to an end. Nevertheless, after some time, I did find myself in a steady long-term relationship. But over time, I found myself still unhappy. And I began to wonder, as I did previously in these situations, whether we shouldn't break up. but I couldn't do it because it didn't seem right. There was nothing really wrong. And furthermore, nothing seemed right. I couldn't stay because I was unhappy, and I couldn't leave either. Because deep down, I think I knew nothing was going to make me happy. No alternate situation was going to be better. No other situation was going to be better. And I was completely paralyzed by this dilemma. And so I did nothing. To her credit, my partner, Emily, weathered this malaise that I was going through like a saint, neither pushing nor pulling. I remember one time we went camping at Waldo Lake. We had canoed out and had a nice spot out there. And on the second day, we went for a walk and sat by the lake for a while. And there I was, sitting amongst all of this beauty with a wonderful companion, and I was overwhelmed with despair, filled with a monstrous emptiness. I was deeply sad, terribly lonely, and absolutely unconsolable. And I couldn't explain it either. But she didn't really make a big deal of it, didn't demand answers or accuse me of ruining the weekend or anything. And that was a great gift. And my doing nothing was also a great gift. And actually, the whole impossible problem was a great gift, because it was like an embodied Zen koan with absolutely no solution other than letting go of selfish desires, selfish views, and the selfish self. So somehow, at some point, I had the insight that all of my problems were related to hope and fear. And around this time, I was interested in the works of Alejandro Jodorowsky. And in his book on psychomagic, he describes how symbolic actions can be healing to the psyche. And intrigued by this idea, and knowing myself to be afflicted with hope and fear, I began to imagine a kind of ritual that might free me of these things. And so with that in mind, I ventured out and I climbed the holy mountain, locally known as Spencer's Butte. So. And I took with me a 3x5 note card. And when I was up there, I tore the note card in half. And on one half of the card, I wrote fear in big capital letters. And on the other half of the card, I wrote hope in big capital letters. And I put the fear card underneath the insole of my left shoe. And I put the hope card underneath the insole of my right shoe, with the idea that I would be stamping these things out of my life. Then I said to myself, I will know when to take these out. And I put my shoes back on, and I climbed down the mountain and forgot about it. And just went about my business. And to be fair, ironically, I think at the time, I didn't really have any hope this was going to work. I just did it. And perhaps as a way of expressing my desire or my willingness to let go of those things. So even as I was going through this really darkest period of my life, I can see now there was like a undercurrent or a movement that was carrying me along on a spiritual path I did not really know I was on consciously. And just like how a relationship appeared in my life, but in a totally new and different way, and my response to it had to be totally new and different, there were other things that were reappearing in my life that I had tried earlier, but they were coming back in this new way. We could say a hopeless way or a selfless way. For example, I started meditating again, but with absolutely no hope that I would discover anything. When I was younger, I meditated with the, full desire to discover the truth of the universe. But now I was doing it just to deal with myself, no hope of discovering anything. And I started reading spiritual literature again, and also with no expectation that the truth could therein be found. And I remember I came to this point one day. I was sitting at the counter, and just out of the blue, I said to Emily, "That's it, I'm done." And she of course said, "Well, what do you mean you're done? Done with what?" And I said, "Everything. I'm out of the game. I don't have anything to say about anything." And somebody asked me recently, what did you mean by that? And it's it's difficult to articulate. And at the time, I don't think I would have been able to articulate it. Like I said, this just came out spontaneously. But it was like all the karmic chains that were at play in my life had just come to an end. And there was nowhere else to go and nothing else to do. And I was completely done with pretending to be anybody at all, and done with pretending to know anything. That was all the game. And I was just throwing my cards in. And I didn't decide to quit. I was, I think, literally just reporting what had already happened. And that's true of this whole story, by the way. It's only now that I can reflect back on this period of my life and kind of make some sense of it. At the time, it was all beyond my conscious understanding. So prompted in part by some things that I was reading at the time, but I would say more by an internal readiness, I began to question some very fundamental things about my experience. For example, one day I was reading a Scientific American special edition about time, the gist of which was, we don't know what time is, but here are a bunch of theories. And what struck me about some of these theories was the way they challenged my unquestioned and unexamined view of time, and prompted me to attempt my own direct inquiry into the nature of time. And some of you may have heard the story of me picking up pens and moving them to the other side of the desk and trying to figure out what is happening, because I could not perceive anything which I would have before called the passage of time. And likewise, one day while I was supervising a study hall, be warned, those of you who have kids, this is what your teachers are doing while they're supervising study halls. I was contemplating the limits of my body as the shell of my skin. And I saw clearly that what was inside and what was outside was the same stuff, mainly empty space. And the dividing line between inside and outside was imaginary, arbitrary, and that this body had no real limit. And finally, I looked into the question of my mind, which was really what I was identified with. I was driving home from work one day, and a question came to me: what is my mind and where did it come from? And it amazes me today to think this question just came to me because it is the quintessential self-inquiry question. It is essentially, who am I? And I was thinking about something Alan Watts lectured about, the gist of which was, the universe is not something separate from yourself. And I was looking at the forest that lined the highway, and I saw clearly that my mind could not be anything different than what I was looking at. Because there can only be one reality, right? And my mind was not different than those trees. As subject and object were one reality, and this reality had no edges and no boundaries. And now I have to say, this was not merely an intellectual conclusion arrived at through logic. It was also like a revelation. I saw clearly, with absolutely no ambiguity, that this was so. And it was a turning point. From that point forward, there was a kind of chain reaction, and I became increasingly unmoored from what I would have previously called reality. I started to feel very strange, as if I were wandering through a dream, day in, day out. And now I would say it was as if all distinctions were dissolving, but I hadn't yet recognized what I was looking at. And I remember standing in a hallway at work, at the school where I worked, looking out the window at the mountains and having the most peculiar feeling. And I can say now, thinking back on that moment, I was right at the cusp of realization. It was, I was completely emptied out. But the root distinction hadn't yet fully collapsed. And then one day I was out at the park eating my lunch, eating a Subway sandwich at a picnic table 20 yards up from the banks of the river. And I was watching a group of crows that had gathered around me. One of them was sitting at the far side of the table watching me eat. And I remember thinking how strange these crows looked, and yet how familiar too. It was a strange feeling. And I finished my lunch. I got up, I threw out my trash. I turned around and I looked up at a big cypress tree. And when I looked up at the tree, the universe turned inside out. There was like an optical distortion even, as if I had instantaneously passed through a tunnel. And then there was no inside or outside anymore. I was stunned, astonished beyond all reason. And then I heard a voice that came from everywhere. And the voice said, this is everything. Everything that ever was, is, or will be is right here in front of you. It always has been and always will be. And I couldn't believe what was happening, but it was clearly happening. And I was filled with joy. And I walked down towards the river, and I turned around, I looked around, and I just laughed out loud. I knew this was exactly what all of the mystics were talking about. There was absolutely no separation between anything. And there was no dividing line between where the world ends and perception begins. such that mind sees mind and world sees world, and the very definitions of these words dissolve. And I will add, everything was just radiating with a stunning beauty, the very perception of which was unending bliss. So that was it. Everything happened on that day in that instant. But in the days, the months, and indeed the years that followed, in addition to just wandering around in bliss, which I did plenty of, and to correlating my own experience with the teachings of other mystics, including Joel, by the way, there was a series of kind of post-enlightenment experiences that I had, or lessons, so to speak, through which I came to a deeper understanding of what had already happened. And if my 8-year-old self were all grown up and still struggling with the same existential crisis, I might say to him, don't shy away from it. Investigate it. Life and death are only ideas. While there is nothing beneath the dreamlike image of this skin, that nothing is reality itself, our own true nature. And therein you will find true happiness and true peace. And with that, I'll open it up to questions. That's a good place to end. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that. Very interesting. Nicely told.
Yeah.
So come up here and ask him some questions now. You must have some doubts about what he said. How
Yes,
could this
challenge
possibly
me.
be?
So at the same time, you're going through this process where you have no hope and no expectations, and you didn't get around to saying it, but eventually, when you went back to check your boots, like they were crushed, right?
Yeah.
At the end.
Have you heard
Yeah.
that story?
Well, a long time ago, yeah. And yet, you were doing all these things. Like, to me, it came out sounding strange. Like, well, why would you take a meditation with no expectation that it would do anything? Like, it's like, well, why wouldn't you just, spend more time eating dinner? Whatever. That's sort of the quandary I'm in. It's like, I can see that, whatever, I won't go into mine
Well,
right now.
I can tell you how that happened. If that will help you, I'm not sure it
it might.
would. It helped
Let's
me.
see.
It helped me.
Let's
so,
see.
so I was in San Francisco visiting my dad and my brother. We would occasionally get together somewhere for a weekend visit, and my brother had gotten into meditation. He had never done meditation before, and he was very enthusiastic about it. He was really getting into it, and I was going through a really difficult time in my life, just as I said, and I thought, oh, maybe I should start meditating again. Mainly because I thought it might just help me deal with anxiety and depression. That's all. And so that's how I started meditating. I had no big goal, no big aspiration as I had when I was younger. I just thought, oh, maybe this will help deal with myself and my life. And so the answer is kind of, look, my dream led me back there. And it led me back there in that way, without that ambition, without that hope.
And could you say something about the quality of the meditation that you did or that you had?
Terrible.
It was terrible. I thought you were going to say the opposite. That without any hope, it was just.
No, it was neither good nor bad. It wasn't, I sat for 10, 15 minutes a day when I could fit it in. I wasn't doing anything complicated. I would describe the things I was doing as focusing, noting, watching my thoughts, and dropping thoughts, letting go. That's all.
Maybe not
Well, that's dropping them, really. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Something seems to have worked. You know?
Hi.
Hello. So I think I just want to find out more about how you teach, how you have students. And like I'm imagining, oh, if I was your student, I think I'll just ask you a question from that place of that I have a question I have about my meditation.
Sure.
So I have been meditating for many years, but on and off. And for most of those years, I really considered myself an utter failure. Like that it just felt like I was recycling the same thing over and over again of getting lost in thought and then doing it all over again. And I just felt like I couldn't manage my attention. So until like the last month or so, feels like it's changing. And what's happening is that I'm starting to ask this question when I sit down, and I don't know if it's wrong for me to be asking this question, but I've been starting to be very curious about perception, and I have my eyes open, and I ask the question, how could it be that there's no separation between what I see and who I am? And so I just start kind of going inside that question. And what I see starts becoming, the quality is that it becomes thicker. And it's like advancing towards me. There's this quality perhaps of merging that's happening, I don't know, but between who I think I am and then what I see. And that's my experience, and I'm actually really excited about it because I'm finding that I'm more interested in meditating, whereas before, when it was always just like failure after failure after failure, it was kind of hard to get myself to do it. But anyway, I just wanted to share that with you and see if you have anything
Yeah.
to say about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I would say, great. This is, you're doing direct inquiry. There's nothing wrong with that. That's exactly what I recommend. Investigate. Well, what is this? What are the teachings saying? How? And then directly investigate them. And so mostly what I would say to you, since you're at the beginning of this investigation and you're enthusiastic about it, is keep going. I don't want to say too much more. You look into it and keep going into that investigation, and I encourage you to do that.
Okay.
And then report back.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
Enjoyed hearing about your story. Wondered, since your experience at the river, how it has affected your idea of service. And tell me what your philosophy surrounding service means to you, please.
Yeah. I'd like to answer that by referring to, I said at the end how I had this series of post-enlightenment lessons. And one of those lessons, actually, I hadn't thought about this one when I was thinking of this earlier. But one day I was standing at my back window, looking out into the backyard. This was shortly after my awakening, and I had the distinct realization that the purpose of my life now was just to bear witness to this, to embody this realization as much as I could, and that, I would say, is my philosophy of service.
When you say embody, do you mean that you're going to help students such as myself to have a similar experience, or what is it that your teaching would provide?
You know, for me, what it provided was truth and peace, peace of mind, and an end to suffering, really. You know, and so if I could help anyone to find the end of suffering, yeah, that would be great. I'm happy to try. One time when I went to see Joel, as I was leaving his house, he said to me, "Do good work out there." That's what I mean. And that's what I mean in terms of my answer to Doug as well. You know, do good work. If I can do good work, that's a blessing, you know. Here's another way of putting it. I like this teaching about compassion. I don't know who this comes from, but somebody said, compassion is like a hand reaching behind the head and adjusting the pillow while one is asleep. So I want to be that hand.
That's pretty sweet. I like that. Okay.
And the way one beats that hand is by not being anybody, by being open, by being open to the compassion that is already here. It's not my compassion. You know,
It's being mindful of.
it's just being open to going wherever that leads you. Yeah.
So, do you have in your past spiritual teachers? And if so, who are your most precious, notable spiritual teachers that you draw from and that you would sort of like to pass on in your teachings? You know, what you learned from them.
You know, my practice earlier in life wasn't really devoted to any particular teachers. I read quite a bit about Zen and a little about Hinduism, and I was a practicing Catholic for a while, and I had a 30-year martial arts practice, and so there was all these different things going on in my life. But the spiritual teachers who I've really resonated with after my awakening, of course, been Joel. As I said, you know, I read Joel's book and felt in accord with everything that he was saying. You know, his book on Way of Selflessness is amazing. And I was also reading after my awakening Ramana Maharshi, who I'd never read before, and really fell in love with him and those teachings. And same with Nisargadatta Maharaj. His book, I Am That, also is absolutely phenomenal. All those teachers resonated very much. And Anandamoyima. So a lot of these Hindu Advaita kind of teachers really resonated with me. And I think, you know, I tend to refer to them quite a bit in my teachings as well. So, but I continue to read widely. One of the, you know, at the time that, you know, we started seeing each other regularly about a year ago. One of the reasons was I wanted to ask Joel recommendations for reading. What should I be reading? I wanted to, you know, I'd heard a lot of his talks, and he refers to all of these different teachers, and the quotes are amazing, and spot on. And so, you know, I wanted to read more widely, and so I've been on kind of a, you know, a little adventure of reading. I have a stack of books at home, and I'm slowly working my way through a lot of different things.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
That answers my question.
good.
Well, yeah, I'd like to follow up that because the question that I came with, I've been hanging out with you on your online group, and I got to go to your first retreat that you offered, and so I was wondering, yeah, what have been the takeaways, perhaps, from your work together since your awakening? I'm just kind of curious, maybe if there's been a change or an addition from that. And so you've mentioned a couple things already, but I'm just wondering if that's kind of morphed things for you a little differently or whatever.
Questions to you, not me.
Okay, I will say this. I've learned a lot from Joel, not just from listening to his talks and reading his books and talking to him in our meetings, but also from watching him, how he behaves, how he's conducted himself, how he teaches, and so all of that has been a learning experience.
I'm going to say something here since you asked the one-sided question. I'm going to give you my side. The most impressive thing to me, I said this already, but I want to repeat it, was when I asked him if he would be willing to just be an ordinary student and go through the program, and and he said, sure. I mean, no hesitation. When he said this, I thought, this is the real thing. So he's not some guy who thinks he's enlightened, looking for a soapbox and looking for ready-made students, and this is the genuine article. So that's what I appreciate mostly from you. Just one of the things, but that really stood out.
When you first asked me if I would be interested in teaching at the center, my answer was maybe. and how I got into teaching to begin with was very similar. I didn't set out to become a teacher either. A lot like Joel, I mainly set out to write a book to bear witness to what had happened to me. And over a couple of years, occasionally some people who I told this story to would ask me questions, and I would answer to the best of my ability. And then sometimes people would come over to my house, and we would meet in the backyard. Mark and I sometimes met in the backyard. And, sometimes they wanted martial arts, and sometimes they would ask me questions and so on. And then one day, this guy, Bruce Abel, came to visit me. He was a friend of Mark's, and I guess Mark had been telling oh, did you? Yeah, okay. So he was a longtime spiritual practitioner and was involved in Tibetan Buddhism. And Mark, I guess, had told him that he knew this guy who was awake. And Bruce told me it took a year before he came over. And when he finally came, he was really skeptical, and sort of put me to task and everything. But he said about 10 minutes in, he was like, and he kept coming back to see me after that. And we would have really great conversations. And one day he asked me if I would be, he knew a lot of people, spiritual practitioners or whatnot, and said, asked me if I would be willing to teach a group of people. And I said, maybe. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. But, he kept coming back, and eventually it happened. And same here, eventually here we are. So.
Anybody else out there in cyberspace?
Oh, Barbara.
Yeah, Barbara, hi.
Hi there. This goes back to Sophie's question and a response of Joel's. I kind of wondered would it have mattered if you'd had any teachers at all?
Well, the first thing I'll say is none of us are without teachers. I had many teachers throughout my life. They weren't all spiritual teachers, but I had many teachers. And I always say, look, the greatest teacher is life itself. And to quote Ramana Maharshi, the self is the true guru. That's everyone's teacher. Also to quote Ramana Maharshi, he said, whatever is going to happen is going to happen no matter how hard you try to make it not happen. And whatever is not going to happen is not going to happen no matter how hard you try to make it happen. So, when Joel told me your life is now taken care of for you, it's really true for us all. The spiritual journey is our lives exactly as they are. And teachers take all different forms. And ultimately, the self is the true teacher. The reality itself, the consciousness itself is the true teacher.
I'm going to ask you a question I get a lot, and that is, you mentioned after your awakening, you were just filled with this bliss and joy. And sometimes people, interact with me and they say, well, I don't know, you don't look like you're walk around in bliss all the time, and, especially if I'm a little annoyed at something. So what do you say to people who ask you that? What, you don't look like you're in bliss. How could you be enlightened?
Yeah. It's a good question, a difficult one to answer for people because it goes straight at the misunderstanding that people have about what it is that I'm saying about bliss. And, what I would say is, first of all, I am not always blissed out. I can be annoyed.
Good.
Yeah, I can be mad. I can be irritated and frustrated and whatnot. Sure. But what I would tell people is those are all things that have to do with, my mind, my body, and that at the same time, I am aware of this larger bliss that is going on all the time, all around us, and is always there. Like the normal way that people say you don't look blissful or whatnot, what they're thinking about is a kind of bliss that comes and goes. What I'm talking about is a kind of bliss that doesn't come and go. And maybe for you, bliss isn't the right word for that. Maybe it gives you the wrong idea. Maybe peace is the right word. But
There you go. I said peace in my mind before he said it. Right there. You said maybe bliss isn't the right word. Maybe, and I said peace. You said peace.
I did too, though, Joel.
What?
I did too, but I'm not enlightened.
Oh, but you're getting there.
So that's what I would say. I talk a lot, in my book, A Billion Fingers Point at the Moon, I talk a lot about how there are all these patterns of small self, big self, small or soul and God, and relative truth and absolute truth. And this pattern appears again and again and again in all the various spiritual teachings. Well, look, there is small bliss and there is big bliss. There is small compassion and there's big compassion. And that bliss that I'm talking about, that is the big bliss, isn't my bliss. It's everyone's bliss. Yeah, or everyone's peace. Yeah.
Okay, if there are no more questions, the big moment's come. So let's have just a show of hands and maybe some vocal support. Who would like Matt to become a official center teacher? Hey! Out there, a little clapping, a little, yeah?
A special kind.
Yeah, who wants to be a special kind of Yahoo here? You have to be really special to be here, I'll tell you that. Okay, now wait a minute. Is anybody who objects? Who doesn't want? Well, no. What kind of Yahoo are you? Somebody, if you know something about the guy, I'm serious about this. If you know something about, that he's a convicted felon or something that we don't know, now's the time to speak up or forever hold your peace.
You could bring it up later.
Okay.
I'll say something.
Okay. It looks like it's official. Welcome, Matt.
What have I done?
Good luck. All right. I think that's it, but we have a final. If anybody wants a final thing about this, we have a last announcement, and then we'll be released into the community.
I'd just like to thank everyone for the questions and for being willing to push me a little. Yeah.
Good.
And so I enjoyed the questions.
They're going to do more of it. I'm glad you like that. You're masochist.
That's how I learned, Joel.
Okay. And otherwise, we'll call it an evening. And until we see you again, peace to you all.
How delightful.